Hi everybody, this is the original Josh, back again with Kranzle USA, Pressure Washer Perfection. And today we're going to talk about one of my favorite pet peeves, and that is sealing threads. So sealing the threads isn't my pet peeve. I find it very easy to seal threads, but I find that a lot of people go to great lengths to seal their threads, but they take a lot of the wrong steps. And that specifically applies to the use of Teflon tape. So what I want to talk about today is where Teflon tape belongs and where it doesn't belong. So as you can see here, I have set this up with Teflon tape on our 22mm threads. You can't see it too well yet, but right here, some peeking out from that connection as well. And then also right here, I have installed Teflon tape on our garden threads. So these are two connections specifically where Teflon tape does not belong. In the pressure washing industry, some would say the Teflon tape's not supposed to be used at all because if it rips off, the threads can get stuck into different parts of the pump. You can clog orifices in your high pressure nozzles. So there is some risk to running into problems if you're not properly applying your Teflon tape. But see, that is the thing. You have to make sure that you properly install your Teflon tape and do it in the right places. So here we have standard pipe thread connections where the lance screws into the turbo nozzle, where the lance screws into the gun, where the quick disconnect and swivel all assemble. Those are tapered threaded connections. So the threads on the male side are cut in a tapered manner. So when the male threads go into the female threads, they're actually wedging themselves in there. And that is where Teflon tape is appropriate. There are other forms of thread sealant that you can use as well that are acceptable. There's types of pipe dope, and then also Loctite and thread lock. Those are acceptable for certain types of connections. You'll usually use those on your male and female connections that are BSP or straight threaded pipe. But in a lot of other places we find Teflon tape on our Kranzles, and it's just because everybody wants to make sure everything's nice and tight. But you don't need it on your garden hose thread, because on this particular connection, the front flange of this fitting seals up against the gasket inside the female garden hose connection. Without this gasket, this is not going to seal. And you can usually tell that the gasket is damaged or missing when you thread your garden hose connections together, because you'll get all the way up to the flange and it still doesn't want to tighten up. So it doesn't matter how much Teflon tape you put on this connection right here, if this gasket is absent or damaged, you're not going to seal this connection with Teflon tape. Now we move on to our 22mm connections. So here you've got your 22mm connector for the hose to the gun jet assembly. And we have 22mm threads between our extended barrel gun jet and our lance and nozzle assembly. No amount of Teflon tape is going to correct a leak between these two connections because the threads are not what seal together. Once again, this is very much like our garden hose. We have a rotating nut that pulls the two connections together. On this connection, if you look very closely at the little nipple that sticks out of the coupling side of the 22mm, there is an O-ring. This is your sealing point, not the threads. If you've got a leak, replace your O-ring. Don't bother putting any tape on here. If you put tape on there and the connections get stuck together, then you'll be complaining about that instead. You can also, like I mentioned, get some of this Teflon tape into the bore of the lance, and then it'll get stuck in your nozzle. The only advantage there would be to applying the Teflon tape in some of these connections would be for the sake of preventing them from corroding together, in which case you would only need one single wrap. But a way to prevent these from corroding together is when you're done using them, take them apart. That's how they should be stored. A couple other places I see Teflon tape when you send your machine in for warranty repair or service, or if somebody just comes by for the shop for supplies. I see sometimes when guys take the check valves out of their pumps or disassemble parts of the unloader valve, they want to put tape on those connections as well. But you also should notice in those connections, most of those connections have an O-ring directly adjacent to the threads. So be familiar with what threads you're putting together and what kind of sealing is taking place before you just start slapping pipe dope and Teflon tape on everything. So you've listened to me rant. I appreciate your time. This is Josh from Kranzle, USA, Pressure Washer Perfection.
Kranzle, USA, Pressure Washer Perfection.